I'm Matt McNicholas, and welcome to our first podcast at First Responders Law. We're here to talk about the issues that face employees that are first responders, not only in Los Angeles and California, but throughout the country. And today we are very, very fortunate to have in studio two guests who are each the president of their respective POA from the Los Angeles Police Department and the San Francisco Police Department. And we will start on the end. Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you very much. My name is Tracy McCray. I'm the president of the San Francisco Police Officers Association, which represents the sworn men and women who work up in San Francisco. I'm a native of San Francisco. I was born and raised there. Would have worn my derby, but I thought it was going to be warm down here, but it's not today. But I've been doing the job of a police officer for, it'd be 35 years this September. And I've risen up, through the ranks where I'm now a lieutenant, but I am the president of the union because we represent everyone up to captain. So I feel very fortunate in the position that I'm doing right now because in our roughly 78-year history, I'm the first and only female president ever.
Amazing. And you, sir, who are you?
I'm Craig Lally. I'm the president of Los Angeles Police Protective League. I've been on the board. First of all, I have 43 years on the Los Angeles Police Department. I've been on the board for the last 13 years and president for the last 10 years. So elected by the membership, like I said, 13 years ago. Prior to that, I spent 30 years in patrol, 5 years in Metro, and made sergeant back in 1991, and then lieutenant about 20 years ago, and pretty much summarizes it.
You know, I actually hadn't added it up until just now that you guys represent 78 years of law enforcement experience in California, which is quite amazing. The first thing I want to tackle or talk about what are the issues facing your members today? We're in a post-pandemic era. It is 2024. Recruiting issues are difficult. Tell us what's going on in your agencies and your unions. What are you hearing on a daily basis?
I don't know. I think we'd have to both agree about recruitment and staffing. So staffing-wise, retaining the people that we have, so retaining that knowledge and experience, while also, everyone's struggling trying to get people, into this profession. After 2020, they did such a great job of tearing it down and making it unattractive for young people to want to come into this profession. We're finding that, I don't know about Craig, but in our academy, we graduated only 6 recruits. And we were used to having classes full of maybe 50 to 55 people. Of course, you're going to lose some in the academy, but at least we would graduate maybe in the mid-40s, 45 to 48 people. And then to only have a class of only 6 graduate, I think that tells a story.
Craig, what are you seeing down here in L.A.?
When I first came on the job 43 years ago, it was a different time. We had no problem recruiting. I came from Cleveland, Ohio. I had just graduated from Kent State University in criminal justice. And we needed 1,000 officers for the 84 Olympics, in addition to all the people that were retiring. I came out here because I watched too much Adam 12 and Dragnet when I was a kid. So that was the impetus for me to come out here, plus 1,000 positions that were opening up. And we had no problem recruiting. We had almost 200 in a class every month for like 2 years. It's changed now drastically. The profession has changed. Just like Tracy said about what happened after the George Floyd, we're having a very difficult time recruiting people. The people that the era now it's just different. It's not that they're not looking at it as a career anymore. It's like, in my opinion, it's, I'll do this for a couple years. If I like it, I'll stay. If not, then I'll go on and do something else. When I came on, people were gonna become cops, and back in the day, it was the best police department in the country. That's what it was when I was recruited, and it's a different workforce now. The camaraderie isn't the same. When I came on, you would not only put in your 8 hours, you go out and go out to have maybe a couple drinks somewhere with the guys, and that's missing. That's missing now. And one of the biggest problems we have in recruitment is our officers, our men and women are the best recruiters, and they're not going out there recruiting and telling what a great job this is. And that's a huge problem with us right now. I don't know if it's going on in
The exact
San
same
Francisco.
thing. Yeah.
Wait, what do you mean by that? They're not. Hold on. The recruiters, the people charged with going out and trying to get people to sign up, are not saying it's a good
No,
job?
I'm talking about police officers are the best recruiters.
Oh, I see.
So it's officers that encourage their children, neighbors. They're not out there recruiting. We are our best recruiters. Is
I
police
see.
officers. So the problem is if you don't have your own personnel that are out there telling people what a great job this is, you're failing immensely on that, because that's how people came on when I came on the job. It was not only across the country; it was from within within the department. Huge. We don't have that anymore because they don't trust the department anymore like they used to.
So, Tracy, I want to kind of jump on that. When you were recruited or when you were being recruited, decided to be a police officer, what was it that moved you to that career?
Well, kind of much like what Craig said, you watch too much Adam 12. Well, my grandmother was a waitress and she worked on the swing shift. So when I stayed with my grandparents, she was always up late at night watching, right, The Rookies, Columbo, Rockford Files, kind of all of that. And I just was like, yeah, I want to do that, because I thought, hey, every day was going to be different. I didn't know what the day was going to bring. And I like that. And it kept you on your toes. So after high school, I actually went into the military. I was a United States military police officer. So I got training from doing that. And then coming into the police department's paramilitary organization, it just flowed right along. I went to Catholic school, so I was used to wearing a uniform, right? It made it easy. But I liked that regimen, that structure. And you did it because you wanted to help people. It certainly wasn't the pay. When we first started, we didn't get paid anything. Heck, our overtime wasn't even in our paychecks. It was a separate check. And sometimes it would take weeks to even get that check for them to process it. So it wasn't we were coming in for the money or the perks. It was, I think, really the belief that we were there to help people and to be that line between chaos and control, right? And so today, like Craig said, I'll piggyback on that. We have people who think, yeah, it's kind of a 9 to 5. What do you mean I got to work weekends? What do you mean I got to work midnights? I think 20 some odd years of my career I spent on midnights, right? I love working midnights. But I think you're missing that dedication, that this is a calling, right? That, you have to put the needs of other people before you, so that protect and serve and service to others, right, before self. I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is kind of missing today. And so, like, I don't know what you may call them down here in LA, but in San Francisco, if we have, your mom or your dad, or your grandparent out, an uncle was a cop, and you came in, you were called a legacy, right? And so now we have people who have kids and they're telling them, I don't want you to become a police officer. Go be a firefighter. Everybody loves the heroes, right? Okay. And so if we're our own best recruiters and we are saying, don't come into this profession, maybe not right now, go do something else. Because we used to have people come in who were like 20 and they become 21 in the academy and they graduate and they're 21 years old and they're coming into this profession. You don't see that anymore.
So interesting. In one of, I mean, you both know I'm not a police officer by any stretch. I'm just an employment lawyer that represents police officers. But in the ticket quota case that that I had some years ago, and on behalf of motor officers, and several of them said to me during the pendency of the litigation, first of all, I can't believe I'm doing this. I never thought I would sue my department. And I would say I hear that from 99% of the people that end up being my clients. And one of them, when you're talking about overtime working weekends, he looked at me and he said, Matt, the first 10 years on the job, I would have worked 24 hours a day. They had to pull me off the shift and send me home. He's like, I didn't even care if I got paid. I just loved the job. And what I have found, and this is what I'd kind of like to move you onto from this point, is because I'm an employment lawyer, maybe it's like the doctor always sees the sick patient, right? If you go to your cardiologist, the cardiologist, by definition, has seen people that have heart issues. But there is a certain dismay by the time somebody gets to me, and they feel like their department has let them down internally. Craig, you and I have had conversations about this over the years. Tracy, you and I have started to talk about this. Can you talk to me a little bit about that issue, meaning how internally, how command, how the people who are making the big decisions, right, that control the tempo and the feeling of the department, how is that affecting morale and the ability to retain officers?
I mean, so we've had in the last 10 years, 2 outside chiefs. It seems like everyone comes up from LA. We don't send anybody from San Francisco down to LA, right? So we've had 2 outside chiefs, Gascon and now William Scott is the chief of police. He was the chief until he became our DA in a move with then Mayor Newsom, who's now our governor. But I think when you talk about the morale of the department, right? When the morale is bad, that means the department's command staff, the management, they're failing. And then they come and look to us at the union to fix everything as if we run the department. So then I start fielding calls about, hey, how come they're trying to change this policy? This doesn't make any sense. We're having a big issue with the overtime. Our overtime budget is going to hit $100 million by June 30th in a couple of weeks, right? Because we're existing on overtime and trying to bring back retired officers to fill the staffing hole that we have. But when management doesn't do their part, right, in backing an officer and speaking out in the public sphere, right, then that's when morale issues happen. Because I know what my job is. My job is to be the voice, to uplift the rank and file, and to bring forth what they're feeling about issues with the job, even issues with management, but basically to make it better for them when they're out on the street working. And management should be right alongside me and trying to do this instead of really worrying about their little lane, right? They only want to stay in their little lane. They're in position. They don't want anything that might negatively affect that. And then they can't jump over to the next lane. And to me, that's very, very selfish and self-centered because then they don't care about the man or the woman out in the street fielding these calls. And so then morale becomes a problem. And then they look to us at the union to try and solve it and fix it.
Craig?
Before you get those calls, usually they call me.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is it's a frustration of these officers. They just want to go out there and do their job. They want to be hounded about ticket quotas or anything else like that. They're hardworking people. They just want to do their job. There's a frustration that comes in when I get the calls from these officers. And, you try to work it out. You'll call the commanding officer of the bureau and say, hey, you can't do that. Or you call ERG, Employee Representation Section, and you just try to fix it. But a lot of times it's like talking to the wall. as far as the department goes. And then these officers are forced sometimes to make a call to you and say, hey, this is what's going on. I'm just frustrated. I don't want to sue, but it's you can tell that they're just frustrated. They just want to go out there and do their job. They just want to be left alone.
So I'm going to key in on what you just said, and Tracy, what you were talking about. And in my practice, I ended up calling it, borrowing something from the criminal practice, turning state's evidence, that people, as they're rising up through the ranks, were hardworking, not just the 9-to-5ers, right? They liked the overtime, they liked the job, it was a career. But then it's all of a sudden they get stars and bars on their collar or their sleeves, and they're an entirely different human being. This is going to be a kind of a tough question, but how does this happen? And I mean, have you seen this happen? And why do you think this happens?
Well, I think it's the department that changes them. You got two ways to go. You go to the department side on especially discipline, or you can be an independent thinker and just do the right thing. The problem on our department, it's been since the 43 years that I've been on the job, people are, when they get above the rank of lieutenant, that's why I've never taken a captain's test or above. You know, I think they make a decision in their life. You got to be owned by the department, or you're going to do the right thing. And I think that's in my opinion.
Wow.
I just think a lot of people think, well, I made lieutenant, and if I make captain, I can make deputy chief, or I can make commander, and it just spirals up, and they don't. I've seen people change. I've seen guys that I worked black and white with, solid cops, protect each other, solid supervisors as sergeants, lieutenants, and they just change overnight because they want to climb as high as they can before they get retire. And it's in one way it's fascinating because it boils down to, is it more money? Is it more power? You're not the same person you were when I rolled around in a black and white we had 5 or 6 years on the job, but I think that's what it is. They make a decision when you go to that rank, and I think what we call is drink the Kool-Aid,
Yes.
and then you're just off on your own. You're not the same person anymore.
You know, it's the rare time, I guess, again, because by the time people get to me, bad things have happened. I won't name names, but occasionally I come across some command staff, some captains, who actually still like being street cops. I had some captains, they weren't my clients, but would still go out on skirmish lines. Now, of course, they wouldn't stand in the skirmish line because they're not, their procedure, but they were immediately behind the skirmish line. They were out. It was 2 a.m, 3 a.m. They weren't phoning it in from the living room. But it is the rare occasion that I come across that. And when you said that it's almost as if, or it is as if, they choose the department over being an independent thinker, that's kind of a disappointing, sad thought. Tracy, do you see that too, where people, as they get higher in command, they kind of abandon becoming independent thinkers and go into the group thought of command?
No, it's totally true what Craig said. I think that happens in all departments across this country. I know for me being a lieutenant, and even Craig being a lieutenant, technically we're part of admin, we're part of management, right? And so leading unions that basically represent rank and file, I'm sure some people were kind of like, but wait a minute. But I think you can never forget who you are, where you came from. And I think that's also part of it, not forgetting who you are and where you came from, because we all started off in patrol. We all were in the academy wearing our light powder blue shirts, right? Which is what I tell the recruits when I go and talk to them. And what you have is people who have, in some cases, risen really quickly up through the ranks because they've wanted to, right? And now trying to set policy and procedure, and they have no idea how to do the job. And the job that they were doing when they first came in is not the job that the men and women on the streets today are doing, for one thing for sure. So they're out of touch. They've never worn a body-worn camera, right? They've never dealt with that. They've never dealt with having these things on a laptop or their phone where people are now signing a citation on your phone. They've never done that. So they haven't done police work the way it's being done today, right? Because they were on a different track. And unfortunately, when you go to that track, you want to rise up and make these commander positions, deputy chief positions. You now work for management, right? You work for this side of it. And it's not so much that you're working for the cops out on the street. And it could be for whatever reason. That's your reason. I have members who are like PFL, Patrol for Life, right? They want to stay on patrol for life, which I thought I was going to. I was very happy in my career when I made sergeant working in Bayview Station up in San Francisco. I thought I'd finish there. I was going to break a really good friend's record. He had been the longest serving sergeant there for 14 years, and I was going to break it in 6 months. And everybody was like, oh, no, you need to take the lieutenant's test. Take it for retirement. Take it for your retirement. Get the bump up in retirement. And I'm like, I think I'm good, but wore me down. I took the test. And it was like, oh, wow, I'm getting promoted. And then you start back down at the bottom of the barrel, right? You're the low person on the totem pole. So I'm like, okay, I got promoted. And then the whole union thing kind of happened at the same time. But I think what you have is that some people make a conscious decision that they want to get as high as they can, sometimes as quick as they can, because they probably really don't want to do that work out on the street. Where you have others who kind of wait for a very long time. It took me 15 years to promote to sergeant. Damn near really took me another 15 years to promote to lieutenant. And my love is being on the street. My whole career, I was on the street.
So let's talk about that for a minute. I'm going to switch your gears again. You made me think of something, Tracy, when you said the job is different today than it was 20, 30 years ago. You were focusing on technology and how you actually deliver the service. But I represent firefighters too, both in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And I was at a lunch with a group of firefighters. I think it's Station 11. They're going to kill me if I get it wrong. 11s. I don't know why they pluralized it down here in Los Angeles, but it's 11s. And it was the busiest station, the busiest firehouse in the country. And they were telling me that 80, 90% of their runs are ODs. And that now they are administering, how about this? It's was not uncommon to now administer more than 30 doses of Narcan on a shift. Mm-hmm. Whereas 10 years ago, it might have been 5 or 6. And they were saying that sometimes it's 3 doses to the same person.
Oh, I thought you were going to say 30 doses in one call. Because that's where we're getting to.
Okay, so talk to us about how, not the politics of addiction or homelessness or being unhoused, but how does that situation, you're the front line, police officers and firefighters, they're the ones that have to go first, right? The social workers are way down the line, right? The politicians in Sacramento and in Washington are way down the line. It's like we have this idea that we want these social services, and when we don't fund it and we don't do it right, we just say call 911 and let the police and the fire department roll out, right? Which is crazy to me. But I want to focus in on how is this affecting your officers and then the public at large with your officers' ability to render services beyond these OD calls.
So I think, you brought up a great point, which is the addiction issues, the homelessness issues, all of these, especially in San Francisco, they tie up our officers, for most of their shift, where they're not doing the job that they want to do, but just go out and stop bad people from doing bad things, the robberies, the shootings, the assaults. Our officers carry around, Narcan all the time. If I hadn't known that, I would have bought stock in this drug, right? Because we were using it at an enormous rate where, maybe before fire department, the paramedics could have administered maybe 1 or 2 doses. I mean, now they're giving 3 and 4 of these doses to one person trying to revive themselves. And they can come back a couple of days later, same person, going with the Narcan again. We actually, in our last, just previous to our last contract negotiations, we stated, hey, look, there are calls that we don't want to go to, that we're not suited to handle these calls. We're not the professionals. And I'm sorry, 40 hours of crisis intervention training doesn't replace what a professional who has went to school and worked in this field will bring to the table, right?
100%.
So we're not the best people. And plus, you keep telling us. See, they were always telling us, hey, your uniform is triggering, right? A person could be triggered because they see you, they see the uniform and what it brings back. Then why are you sending us to these calls, right? Why are you sending us to these calls where, yes, let's say that person has done a criminal act, right? And then we get to deal with them and trying to process them down at our county jail where they get rejected, right? Then we have to bring them to the hospital. We have to bring them to psych emergency services. I mean, in a 10-hour shift, there's your 10 hours dealing with this one call.
And of course, that impacts your officer's ability to respond to calls for service for the other citizens of San Francisco.
Where you have calls hanging for days to have police response.
Keen on that. As we've come out of the pandemic, the courts shut down, right? And down here in Los Angeles, we started trying cases again in early 22. And my first trial out of the pandemic was a LAPD employment trial, and actually did 8 in a row over 2 years. It was grueling. But why it was interesting is that in jury selection, when you represent a police officer in an employment case or a firefighter, you always voir dire on that topic, right? And because particularly coming out of the pandemic and 2020 and George Floyd and all of these social movements and social awareness, it was a hot topic. And we would voir dire on this subject. And invariably, there would be 3 or 4 of the 40 jurors that would say, you just got to burn the police department down. Start again. They didn't use that language. I will say that over the 2 years, those people fell off, and that was no longer reported. But what was reported was the delay in the calls for service, where jurors were upset, rightfully so. My car was broken into, my laptop was stolen. I called, LAPD, and they said, we'll try and get there in a couple hours, and they never showed up, and I called back. You can fill in the blank. And it made me think about the series of dominoes that fall down. One, when you don't have enough bodies, that the average citizen, the consumer of your product, right? It's not just the suspect, but it's everybody is the consumer of your product, starts to experience a degraded product, right? Because you can't help that, LAPD, Greg, you can't help that your numbers are, hovering at 9,000 when they should be at 10, and you're on your way below 9,000. And as Tracy's pointing out, you could have a narcotics-related call that ties 2, 3 officers up for an entire watch. So I have seen it in my world because jurors are giving the feedback. So, Craig, I'm going to open this up to you, and I know this is a big question, but how do we address that? And I'm not just asking you as a lawyer that represents police officers. I'm married, I have children, I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, my children are here, my parents are born and raised here, my siblings are raised here, this is my city, right? And I know people feel like this in San Francisco. How do we start to address this problem?
Well, I think slowly but surely people are really realizing that defunding the police or abolishing the police is a very bad idea. It's overnight in the last, say, year and a half, people, I think people are more supportive of the police now than they were during, like you said, pandemic era. I think it's turning around because I think people realize that bad people have to go to jail. They have to, there's consequences for bad actions. I think the public is now, more than any time that I've been on the job, are aware of how tough our job is. And even though that we don't respond in a timely manner, they understand. They get frustrated just like we do. We want to get there as quickly as possible. Name your crime. Even if a neighbor dispute, we want to get there as quickly as possible. But we don't have the resources. You're right. We're down. We were at over 10,000 just a few years ago. And
2019.
We've lost, those are, when you lose 1,000 people, 1,000 police officers, you don't think there's going to be a change in service if that happens? And, the same people that were bad-mouthing the police department, it also caused a ripple effect with people out there that want to be police officers. That pool is shrunk to pretty much nothing now because when you get bad publicity, and nobody wants to be a cop, what do you think you've just done? At the end of the day, the public is the one that suffers.
Right.
If we can't get qualified people to do my job when I leave, they're the ones that are going to suffer, But the good side is I think it's coming back. All the evidence is there for me. It's going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of time. But until we can get people to understand this is a great job, and we want to encourage people to join our profession, until we make that happen, nothing's going to change. Because we're going on the same thing with Tracy, with 6 people graduating from the academy. We have probably 20. I think our last graduation class was 14, when we used to graduate 70 a month. Because and it's not about money. The mayor has budgeted. She didn't cut our budget at all this year. She increased it. She increased to hire 780 people a year, but we're never going to get anywhere close to that.
Well, she made a promise, Mayor Bass. Maybe it wasn't a promise. She outlined a 4 or 5 point plan down here in Los Angeles. And one of them was increasing the numbers at LAPD. And then she had a plan, some points within LAPD. She wanted 9,500. She wanted certain people to be in detectives, all great things. And I remember at the time that this was being announced, I thought, okay, perfect, because she was running against Rick Caruso, who was considered far more conservative than her, but he ran on a significant police platform. And basically what she ended up saying after she was elected was, in essence, what he was saying before. But it's fine, all good. So, but when I would talk to people like you two or clients of mine who had said, oh, we're in drop, which is, what drop is, so that you retire, but then you work a few more years. And so many of my clients were in drop, and they're like, not only are we not going to get to 9,500, we're going to dip below 9,000 for some time before we start pulling up. So with that in mind, thinking about it this way, I come across an issue with officers, and we've talked about this, with permanent restrictions, light duty. And San Francisco has a pretty hard and fast rule, has for some time, that there's no permanent light duty. There might be a few rare exceptions. LAPD has started to do this with the recently departed Chief Michael Moore. In 2019, he re-enlivened Special Order 7. For all of you insiders, Special Order 7 basically said no long-term IOD, light duty. So, but here's my question. The people who call them permanent duty restrictions, light duty, can't they do the administrative jobs that full-bodied officers are doing and being pulled out of the field? Is that a reasonable solution
it's very
that you see up in
reasonable.
San
I know
Francisco?
voters pre-pandemic passed, they wanted to civilianize more jobs within the police department. Which, okay, yeah, that sounds really, really good. But, you just can't hire any civilian either to come in and work in the police department because of the access that they may have, right? And so having officers who unfortunately may have been injured on the job, they have this status, right? They would obviously be a better choice to do a lot of the administrative tasks because they already know the system,
Right.
right? There's no extra training for them, right? They don't have to go through a hiring process, right? They should be easily able to transition over to some of these admin jobs. I had a young man who was working, unfortunately suffered a back, shoulder, I believe a knee injury, and they said because of this, he was too disabled and, shuttered him out the door under disability, where he was a great video retrieval officer. He could compile stuff. He could put it all together for the investigators so they wouldn't have to go out and do it, right? And just smooth transition. He could have stayed doing that job. But because of this, we don't want any more permanent light duty, people working. And I think it's really about the money. As everything always comes down to, it's about the money.
But there's the irony, and I'm going to agree with you because I see a lot of these clients. I had a police officer, I had a police officer at the LAPD who had suffered a very significant injury, but loved the job, loved the uniform, and basically said, I'll do whatever you need me to do. And so they had him working in detectives at the detective front desk, which is where people would come in if they have an ongoing caper, right? They lost a family member, robbery victim. And he would handle all of those encounters. He would be able to do low-end police work for the detectives. And they knew it because he was a police officer with 15 years experience. And I'm going to use a different name. They'd say, hey, Bob, will you call these 3 witnesses and take a report? Well, he could actually take a report, right, and do the low-level stuff. And as it came time to compile the investigation, they could give it to him and say, will you do X, Y, and Z? And with the new policy, they said, we're not going to accommodate you anymore. And the evidence in the case was undisputed that once they sent him home, they had to pull a full-bodied officer out of the field. And so why that happens is beyond me. But when you talk about the expense, it's actually, and Craig, I'm going to have you jump in on this, from what I see, more expensive to not accommodate them when you have to engage in these programs like RIP, and I'm going to have you explain what the RIP program is in LAPD to keep officers on, right, to give them a pay bump so that they don't leave. The expense that both of your departments, your cities, are now bearing to hold on to the officers they have because they can't hire new ones seems far more expensive than keeping the person you already paid to recruit and train. So, Craig, what efforts that you can describe, at least generally, are happening down in Los Angeles just to hold on to the officers you have?
Well, just to go into what you earlier stated, everything that you're saying makes sense. Okay, why are we doing this? Why aren't we keeping officers on the job in the current positions? There's no logic on the other side. I'll give you a case in point. I used to have about 7 officers in West LA. I used to be in charge of all the demonstrations at the federal building since George Bush 1 on. And I had a cadre of about 7 officers. Some of them worked subpoena control. They had administrative functions. They do audits. I had a cadre of 7. They were trained in anything that went on in a demonstration. So they knew they could leave their desks, go up to the federal building, set up their tables, and they'd check in people, check them out, put them in squads. And it's like a force multiplier. I didn't have to worry about training anybody else. These guys, and they love doing it too. So they would go up to the federal building. We'd do all the essential administrative stuff. And it worked. It worked I was there for 13 years. And now, obviously, that's gone. You don't have those experts anymore. And that force multiplier where you didn't have to put full duty people into those positions when you were you could have another squad. Because if you took 7 more people and teaming up with about another 7, you got 14 for a squad. You understand? It just made sense. And I just think that the department itself right now is, you ever go to somebody and you got a very logical explanation for something or what do you want to do, and they just say no? and that's and it's just, I beat my head against the wall with the department a lot of times, and and nothing is going to convince them. Nothing is going to convince them because they're just going to say no. It's just a bizarre world that I live in sometimes, and that's the frustrating part. And I even think they understand it's the right thing to do, but it's just hell no. It's very frustrating. And I know you're frustrated, and because you talk to the officers that are losing their positions, and they're doing a phenomenal job. I know some of them, okay? And they get, obviously they start with me sometimes, get frustrated, then some other calls are made to you, but it's just, it defies logic sometimes. It just defies logic. We don't have enough civilians right now to fill these civilian positions. We're never going to, okay? And it's an easy transition from a police officer because they're in that world. They understand what's going on. It's an easy transition for the benefit of the department and the officer to fill these positions
with light duty officers.
Yes,
because they know the job.
Yes, they know the job. They know, and they enjoy it. And they come to work every day. Where a lot of times you hire these civilians, you're rolling the dice when they first get there if they're even going to come to work. Depending, they're dedicated.
The analogy I use in my practice is if I have a lawyer that's a lawyer and been a lawyer for 10 or 15 years and they suffer some injury, now they can't go into court anymore and now they can't do exactly what they did before. Having that person work in a slightly lesser role for me will be better than any paralegal I could ever find, hire, and train because they're just not a lawyer. And in these disability cases that I handle, and we look at a lot, we can't take them all, but to a person, without exception, their sergeant, their lieutenant would testify in the case, it was a tragedy that we lost this officer. I relied on this guy, this girl for so many things. They knew how to do this, they knew how to do this, they knew how to do that. I didn't even have to tell them. And part of the tragedy, and I see it in the faces of jurors, is when our clients, they're on the stand for 2 or 3 days explaining their career, their life, and what happened to them. The jury see what an amazing resource it is, right? I mean, it costs hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for each of your agencies to locate, recruit, get through all the background checks, get through the academy, and get through probation to have one unit, right? And then you're going to spend another several $1 million, salaries, retention, training that person. Why would you take that multi-million-dollar asset and say, oh, okay, well, you can't make a forcible arrest anymore. You can only work the radio. You can only work the kit room. So we're going to throw you out. It is, as you say, Craig, there's zero logic to it, and there's zero business sense. If that were a private business, the person making that decision would have been fired 10 times over.
And could I just add something to that? Is we're not creating positions for these officers. We're not creating them. They're there already. And that's the mind-boggling part on my end is it's not like we're creating positions and plugging somebody in there and just creating it because, okay, you can't be in the field. He or she can't be in the field.
Right.
It's there already. It's obviously an important position, okay, because it's so important that we're putting full-duty people in those positions. So we're not arguing. We're not going to get rid of the position. We've all admitted it's an important position. We're putting full-duty people in there when we could have the person that was there prior just usually doing a phenomenal job, and it's a win for everybody.
Tracy, how many officers are you guys down now from a full complement?
I think a little over 600, probably approaching 7 by June 30th, because it's the end of the fiscal year, so everybody's starting to retire.
And are you, I pretty much know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is your department having to pull able-bodied officers out of the field to do administrative work?
So, yes, they are, because, well, obviously it's not enough officers, but also, the amount of overtime, being spent just to fulfill a shift at a station where, day shift at a regular station, there should be, I don't know, like 10 officers working and there's only 3. Right.
Somebody's got to work the
Somebody's
radio.
got to answer those calls that keep popping up, on that computer screen. And so, I mean, it's going to be really, really interesting. And so, as you were saying before, about what Mayor Bass was doing down here and about, upping the budget to want to try to get back graduating over 700 people from your academy. It's the same thing for us. I say realistically, it's going to take us 10 years if we're going to get back to full staffing. And, we're in the midst of having a mayor's race that's going to happen November 5th. And so everyone's platform is public safety, right? Everyone is promising, we'll get back to full staffing within 3 years. And I'm like, what dope are you smoking? You must have been in the Tenderloin and getting that secondary hit off of whatever's floating in the air out there, because that's not happening at all. That's not even realistic. Our budget has been increased. The mayor Bree just introduced the budget for San Francisco, the 2-year budget, and it's at its highest it's ever been, $15.6 billion. The police department budget got a boost of, I think it was another $33 million. So our budget is at almost $850 million, which most of the budget is like for your personnel, your salaries and, benefits and stuff. But to increase academy classes, to have more of them, which is a far cry from taking $120 million from our budget in the sheriff's office back in 2020 with this, the whole defund crap, abolish police. And I always say, did they actually believe that criminals were going to say, oh, wow, that's great, you're abolishing the police, I guess I won't do any more crime anymore. I can just take a break. Maybe I'll put in for retirement, try something new. What the hell are you people thinking? No criminal was going to say that. They were going to be like, okay, hey, great. And you're giving us stuff too. We'll take that. But we're still going to go out and do what we want to do, which is victimize innocent people and just keep rolling along like there's no consequences. And so now it's like, oh yeah, crime does still happen. Even when you say some of the most stupidest stuff ever known to man about the policing profession. And now you all want us and you want more of us, but where are we getting? We're all competing against each other to get the best of the best, because lowering standards doesn't work well in our profession.
Right.
Letting people in to do this job who shouldn't do this job just because you need a body is not a recipe for success. It's a recipe for disaster. And where we see it at the union side is when we see names continually coming up asking for coverage for legal defense because they're getting into some crap or mess or whatever it is, right? So we know maybe that person doesn't need to do this job. Most of my career, I was a field training officer, which means when people come out of the academy, they have to go through a field training program. And so although, it wasn't personal, it was professional, there were people I had to tell, look, this isn't the job for you, right? And you might be good at something else, but this particular job, not your forte. It's not one of your strengths. So it's probably best that we're having this conversation now before we have this conversation later down the road, because some incident has happened and you have made a choice and it has hurt someone, right? Whether it be an innocent person out on the street, a citizen, a fellow officer, right? Like, no, it's better to have that conversation at the forefront and to be honest. And the easiest place where someone who shouldn't be doing this job, where they're not succeeding is in the academy. And right now, where we're having issues is we recycle people. So we recycle them. They may have failed something in the academy, but we bring them back and give them a second chance and a third and a fourth and a fifth chance until they kind of pass it. They finally pass the academy. That's not a recipe for success either. So again, you're going to see it down the road. The constituents, the people, who are expecting to get the best police services, sometimes you're not going to see it.
I've always, while I don't do use of force cases, I only do employment, I do teach a constitutional use of force class at Loyola Law School. And one of the things that we discuss in that class, because these are lawyers to be, is that police officers in a constitutional democracy are the actual front line of the government's interaction with its citizens with the Constitution. There are senators and congressmen, they pass bills, but that takes forever and it goes back and forth. But on an interaction, right, when a police officer or officers light someone up, pull them over, they have now stopped somebody. They have detained them, right? The Constitution is in.
Mm-hmm.
What they say, what they don't say, what they do. Do you get them out of the car? Do you not get them out of the car? What do you run? What do you look? Can you open the trunk? Can you not open the trunk? And what I tell these students, and it's in line with what you were just saying, is, well, of course we want that. We want to hold our police officers to the highest standards. To me, what I would tell these students is that's why the badge, or that's what the badge should stand for, and that's why it deserves respect. Because we expect the men and women that wear the uniform to maintain their calm and cool no matter what is being screamed at them, no matter what racial epithet is being screamed at them, no matter whether they're being spit on, that they just have to follow their training. And Tracy, what it sounds like what you're talking about is when you don't have your pick of the litter anymore, that gets more complicated. And the level of service that gets rendered can be compromised.
Well, I think, we're dealing with SB2 and so look, we all don't want people who shouldn't do this job doing this job. We don't want, as people say, the bad apples, right? The people who come into this job and unfortunately go down a path of where they've been dishonest, of where they've committed a crime, right? It's not good for our profession. And so you start at the beginning when people are coming into this profession to make sure your standards are there. So you don't hire people like that. I get over years the job does change people because we see what the worst of another human being can do to another human being. We go to some of the most horrific and tragic calls out there. Anything dealing with a child, in my career, unfortunately, I've seen a 6-month-old baby be shot and killed. Nobody wants to see that. I've been to numerous suicides, right? Like we've been to horrific scenes. And yes, that does change people over time. And you would hope that departments, whether big or small, have strong unions, but also have strong behavioral science unit, critical incident training, peer support, all of that, right? To help people deal with some of the things they see. Because we've known people who unfortunately have kind of went down the rabbit hole with alcohol addiction,
right,
even drug use addiction, right? But you want the resources there. But it all starts in the beginning. That's the foundation. And you want someone with a strong foundation to be able to handle everything that probably is going to be thrown at them in this job. And if you don't have a strong foundation in the beginning, then you're going to see the issues and the problems as people kind of get their way into this profession.
Okay, here's our outro. You each get 30 seconds on this, so think about it.
Okay.
You could sit down in front of each of your respective mayors and say, here are the 3 things that need to be done right now to make policing better in Los Angeles, you get San Francisco, okay? And so what are those 3 things? Be as specific as you can,
Well, off the top is recruitment.
okay?
That's the number one. I would say that 3 times, to be honest with you, because that affects so many layers. Is a more robust recruitment on the personnel department side, because we don't handle the recruitment. The police department has really nothing to do with recruitment. It's done by the personnel department. We give officers to personnel, but they make the decisions. And I think that is the biggest problem we have right now. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of talk. They're doing such a bad job that we want to take it over. We want to take over recruitment and start, because the problem we have right now is that when we're partially responsible and the personnel department's partially responsible, when things fail, they point to the other person.
Of course.
And that's a huge problem. And I think that's the number one problem we have going on in the city right now is there's a lot of talk about the personnel department. It's the few people that we can get through the system to actually qualify to be police officers, some of them are just DQ'd for stupid reasons, just for whatever reason. And that's part of the problem is nobody's been given, well, they're pointing fingers at each other right now. And we can't allow that to happen. We need one person in charge, and we think we would do a better job. So that's my biggest point that I would make to the personnel, to the mayor, would let us take it over. We used to do it prior to Rampart, prior to Rodney King. The Rodney King thing changed our world on a lot of levels. But one of them is the personnel department had more authority for recruitment and hiring.
Okay, Mayor Bass, Lieutenant Craig Lally just volunteered to take over recruiting. So
Yeah, I'll do it right now.
give him a call. All right, Lieutenant, you get the last word. I guess you could go down to one. You have the mayor, you have her for 30 seconds, and you say, this is what needs to be done now.
Our biggest issue, I think, is support and leadership. So the support of actually the mayor and our board of supervisors, right? That coming out and telling people that, yes, public safety, yes, is the number one priority of government. If you want a safe city for your citizens, the people who work there, the people who visit, then you need to support and back your police department. The leadership of the police department, to have a strong chief that's going to stand out, and say, yes, I have the best interests of the men and women who are doing this job. Because when they don't come out and say anything, then that's just left to wonder, do you actually care, right?
Right.
So we've been on this island by ourselves with the union, holding the line and saying those things, where it should be, quote unquote, the leaders of the city doing that also, right? Either standing shoulder to shoulder with us or just saying it themselves. And then other things will start to fall into place. But when you don't have your city government wanting to back their police department, there are going to be issues and there are going to be problems. And I think, we've seen that.
I got a number 2.
Okay. Okay.
If you want it.
Fire away.
Okay. Obviously, we have a vacancy in the chief's position right now.
Yes.
And we have an interim chief. We need a leader on this department moving forward. We got the World Cup, we got, the Olympics, we got a Super Bowl coming up, which is very important to the mayor because she's going to probably be here for all of those.
And important to the citizens.
We're looking. We need strong leadership. I don't care if it's from the outside or the inside. We need a person to turn this place around because we have a lot of problems in this department. Discipline being number one. So we got plenty of managers on this department, but very little leaders. And that's if she could pick the right leader to lead this department for years going forward, I would take that over recruitment right now because you're talking about at least 5 years, potentially 10 years, we would have that chief. And Bill Bratton was an outsider, and And getting back on, he couldn't believe how we eat our own in discipline, and he's always said that to this day. And it still hasn't been fixed or attempted to be fixed since he left.
Right, because what you're referring to is that your department uses a discipline system, not an HR system, right? So when you report something, it gets treated as potential misconduct. It doesn't go to some HR manager who then does remediation training. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Well, thank you both very much for being here. Also, thank you for your years of service on the job and in your current positions. And I know I speak for everybody who's listening to this. We pray to dear God for your longevity and your well-being. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.